Hey everyone, so here's the second video to go into a little more detail on these interesting Yakut knives. A little unique and ethnic kind of design. Related in some way and similar to Scandinavian knives, especially Finnish bukos, but a bit different. Longer, as I talked about in the last video. Uh, Pretty simple, but also has that one distinguishing feature of having that fuller in the blade, and also having that asymmetrical blade. So let's talk about that for a second. As you can see, in a second, I will show you a few different types of these different knives that I have. Some of these, they're made from different steel, obviously. Carbon steels are pretty typical. This one is a stainless or semi-stainless D2 equivalent, I think, from Russia. And this one actually has a little more ornamentation, as you can see. It has a little bit more going on there, on the bolster there with this antler carving. But again, birch burl, and pretty simple design, pretty clean. Same as I talked in the last video, this long handle that exceeds the size of your palm. And so the thing about the blade, and this one is a little different on example from some of the other ones, the more typical ones I have that I'll show in a second, but it's this asymmetrical nature of it. You have the fuller on the one side, and you got this convex lens on the other side. All right, and so maybe let's take another one that's a little more typical. Actually, this one is, you can see, also has a little bit of a convex thing going on both sides, if you look closely. But this is a more typical, very simple, as you can see, nothing on the handle besides just the wood. And this one has a different type of fuller, right? Kind of it has the smithing, the hand forged finish left on it, and so that's typical of a lot of the knives that come out of Yakutia these days. Some have very wide ones, kind of like this guy. Basically the full length of, or the full width, the full everything really on the other side of the blade. But you can see if you flip it over, the other side is a lens, is clean, is different. It's a convex shape, and so that's really the most distinguishing feature. I think this one is really easy to see as well, that I was showing in the last video, where you have that interesting blade, right? Different sides, looks different. Now, so I talked about the handle and the sheath a little bit in the last one, and the size, and kind of the materials. So this is typical. This is the 65G Russian steel. It's a spring steel, high carbon, I believe. Pretty low on corrosion resistance, but works really well in extreme temperatures, which is really important in Siberia, where it's like minus 30 degrees Celsius now already. So they have, I think, some of the coldest, if not the coldest days of the year. So, they have to be careful about what steels they choose and how well those perform in extreme variations, especially from summer to winter, when you go a whole range of, 50 degrees or more Celsius. So anyway, actually a lot more than that, more like 40, more like 60 or more degrees Celsius in the whole range. So what, oh yes, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the more typical, possibly, and this is one of those controversies probably, type of sheath for these things is actually made of oxtail. Don't know if this is traditionally, I don't think if anybody really knows if this is traditionally the more common one, or leather was common as well. But oxtail is a really interesting material. Kind of feels like leather, looks like wood, something in between. Also, they use this horsetail for hanging it up, right, for the belt loops, which can be a little different. You can have this plain white like on this one. You can have really this really interesting black and white variation braid, and come in some different patterns, thicker or thinner. So that kind of makes them really interesting sometimes too, because you've got this really crazy horsetail. Oxtail comes in different types as well. You got the more cleaner, smoother from some of the makers, and a bit more rough everyday use kind of thing on this one. Very simple knife that I have, and that actually has a more modern blade with, you can see, well, this is actually an interesting point that I might talk about a bit more in detail later, but there's a bit of controversy as to what kind of a fuller was more typical in the old days, because a lot of the museum pieces that they have actually have these clean ones, and even if they kind of cover the whole blade, they're not usually this type that you have, the hand-forged fuller type that you see a lot these days that is really popular. But anyway, that aside, we'll come back to that at some point. This is a very typical kind of working knife that comes out of Yakutia these days. So I don't know if you can, yeah, you can see it here. So this one is really simple. There's a bit of a wooden insert on the inside here, but the oxtail itself is a bit rough, simple. Got this pretty basic belt loop attached to it, but it works really well, cuts really well. So maybe that's something we should talk about in the next video. Thank you for watching.